Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Dr. Mohib and the topic today is pleura. Look, pleura is a closed sac made up of fibrous tissue and the inner surface is being lined with a secretory mesothelium like that. You can see it over here. Make it close. Look, this is a closed sac made up of fibrous tissue and the inner surface is being lined by secretory mesothelium which secretes the lubricating fluid. The pleura is having two layers, visceral and parietal, and to have a concept of the visceral and parietal, you come over here please. Before going into pleura, now look over here. This is the thorax. This is the mediastinum, and each side is being occupied, each half by the two lungs, right and left lung, lying in its own pleural cavity. And look, this is the apex of the lung, and this inferior surface, look, this inferior surface, or you look over here, this one, this inferior surface, this one, this is concave because this inferior surface, it rests upon the convex tube of the diaphragm. So this is inferior surface of the lung and this is apex of the lung, and this surface is the medial surface or mediastinal surface. And then this whole surface is being called as costal surface because it is in contact with the ribs. Okay, and this surface is called as mediastinal surface or medial surface. And you look over here on the medial surface, you can see over here, make it close, many structures enters into the lung tissue and leave the lung tissue. You can see over here many structures that leave and enter into the lung tissue. This point is being called as hilum of the lung, and the structure that is the arteries, the bronchi and the veins and the nerves and lymphatic vessels, combinedly this structure is being called as root of the lung. Root of the lung is the structure that enters, and the hilum is the point through which the structure enters into the lung. Okay, now to have a concept of the parietal and the visceral peritoneum, visceral pleura. Now what you do, you please give your full attention. You take one balloon full of air in this cavity and one balloon full of air present in this part of the thoracic cavity. Then what you do, you take the lung and indigenate, look, this is below. This is the medial wall of below and lateral wall of below. And you take the lung and indigenate the lung into this balloon from the medial side, indigenate into it. And indigenate so much so that the medial wall of the balloon, it touches the lateral wall. When you do it like that, it will become like this. Look, if this is the lung tissue, the balloon will display around it, and is it the structure that enters and leaves the lung tissue, that is the hilum of the lung. So when you indigenate the lung into this balloon from the medial side, it will display around the lung tissue in this way, which is over here, and reflect like this. Okay, so in this way you will see that this is the lung tissue, and the balloon is now having a double layered investment around the lung tissue, and one layer of the balloon is in contact with the lung tissue and one layer of the balloon is in contact with the thoracic wall, while it is open from the medial side where the structures enter and leave the lung tissue. So this is called as visceral pleura, that is in contact with the lung tissue, and that is called as parietal pleura, which is in contact with the thoracic wall. Okay, this is one concept of the visceral and parietal pleura. Another concept, to have the concept of the visceral and parietal pleura, you look, this is the lung tissue. Look, this is the sheet which is made up of fibrous tissue. It surrounds the lung tissue, look, but when it reaches over here to this lung root area, when it reaches over here to this area, from this it is reflected over, onto the thoracic wall. It lines the inner surface of thoracic wall, and then it reaches over here, and ultimately again it unites with this wall this way. You can see it starts from over here and it covers the lung tissue. When it reaches over here, from this it is reflected over the thoracic wall and then comes like this and again unites with this layer. In this way, the pleura is having two layers: the parietal layer, which is in contact with the thoracic wall, and the visceral layer, which is in contact with the lung tissue. Okay. All right. And the space between the parietal and visceral layer, as I showed you over here, this space between the parietal and visceral layer, this space, this space is very thin, and almost this visceral and parietal layer are in contact with one another. As I give you the example that you put it below, and indigenate the lung from the medial side into it, so that the medial wall of the balloon touches the lateral wall. So the two layers are in contact with one another and having a thin film of fluid being secreted by these mesothelial cells. And this is lubricating fluid, so that this parietal pleura and the visceral pleura, they slide one upon the other, and upon the lung tissue which is landing, it is being lubricated and it can slide easily one upon the other. It is a potential space. The two pleura are almost in contact with one another. But in disease condition, when more fluid accumulates, then these two pleura, the visceral parietal pleura, they separate from one another. Okay, now I hope this is the concept of the visceral parietal pleura will be clear to you. Now, the parietal pleura, look, which lines the inner surface of the thoracic cavity, and it lines the upper surface of the diaphragm, and it lines the medial surface of the lung tissue. It is being given different names according to the situation where it lies. Look, this is the apex of the lung. And note one point over here. Look, this is the first rib, and you can see the apex of the lung. It ascends above the first rib, somewhat 2 to 3 centimeters above the first rib, into the root of the neck. But note the point: the apex of the lung is not above the neck of the first rib and not above the first thoracic vertebra. It means that the first rib descends obliquely from the first thoracic vertebra like this. So anteriorly, the apex of the lung lies, it crosses superior to the first rib. Okay, and over here the parietal pleura that lies over the apex of the lung and lies the inner surface of the thoracic cage. This part of the parietal pleura, this is being called as dome of the pleura, or also being called as cupola, or also called as cervical pleura. And over here, this part of the pleura is being covered, this cervical pleura is being covered by a membrane which is called a suprapleural membrane. Over here, it is being covered by a membrane which is called a suprapleural membrane, which lies above, which over here lies and the suprapleural membrane, you know, it originates. Look, it originates from the transverse process of the seventh cervical vertebra, and then this membrane get attached to the inner border of the first rib. Over here is this suprapleural membrane, like that. Superiorly, this suprapleural membrane is attached to the transverse process of the first vertebrae, and lower down is attached along the inner border of the first rib, and in this way it is the upper superior wall of the thorax, and it lies upon the cervical pleura. And over here on this membrane may be some muscle fibers present, which are called as the vellus muscle or scalenus magnus muscle. Okay, and this part of the cervical pleura, you know, you can see it over here, it is being crossed by these subclavian vessels. This part of the pleura is being covered by, this is crossed by these subclavian vessels. Okay, then the part of the pleura that lies the inner surface of the ribs. Look, the part of the pleura that lines the inner surface of the rib, look, it comes up to here. You can see this is the 12th rib, and this is being called as costal pleura. Okay, well, the part of the pleura that lies upon the dome of the diaphragm, and that is parietal pleura, that is being called as the diaphragmatic pleura. And the part of the parietal pleura that lies on the medial surface of the lung, that is called as mediastinal pleura. Note the point. Look, if this is the lung, the pleura over the apex, it is called as cervical pleura. The pleura over the inner surface of the thoracic wall, that is called as costal pleura. And the pleura over the diaphragm, that is called as diaphragmatic pleura, while the pleura on the medial surface is being called as mediastinal pleura, parietal pleura. Okay. Alright. And this parietal pleura to the inner surface of the thoracic wall, it is being united by a loose connective tissue which is called as endothoracic fascia, which connects the parietal pleura to the inner surface of the thoracic wall. At this point, note another important point, that look, this parietal pleura comes so much over here up to the 12th rib, and from this it is being reflected over onto the diaphragmatic pleura. In this way, this angle which is being formed between this costal pleura and the diaphragmatic parietal pleura, it is not being occupied by the lower margin of the lung. Look, lower margin of the lung comes up to here, while the parietal pleura, costal pleura comes up to here. This is the last rib. The parietal pleura comes up to here, and from here it is reflected over to diaphragm. In this way, this angle or recess which is being formed between the costal parietal pleura and diaphragmatic parietal pleura, this is being called as castrophenic recess, or diaphragmatic recess of pleura, or castrophenic angle. And look, this recess or this empty space between the parietal costal pleura and the parietal diaphragmatic pleura is not being occupied by the inferior margin of the lung in normal respiration, but in forceful respiration it may come lower down up to the 10th vertebra, but even then the lowest part is being empty, and this in X-ray is called as castrophenic angle of pleura, while in anatomy it is being called as diaphragmatic recess of pleura. And this is the most lower or most dependent part of the pleura, and if any fluid accumulates in the pleural cavity as a disease condition, this castrophenic angle is the first part because it is the lowest part that is being occupied by this fluid, and then we say that the Castrophenic angle is being obliterated. You can see this in this X-ray. You look over here. Is it clear in X-ray? Full. Look, this is the Castrophenic pleura, and this is the diaphragmatic pleura. Look, this is the diaphragmatic pleura, and this is the Castrophenic pleura. And this angle, please make it clear, this angle, this is called as Castrophenic angle in X-ray, or castodiaphragmatic recessive pleura. That is the part of the pleura over here, where the parietal pleura of the costi and parietal diaphragmatic pleura, they come into contact with one another. In other areas, the visceral and parietal pleura come into contact, but in this area, over here, the two parietal pleura come into contact with one another. And look, this is the most inferior part, and if fluid accumulates in this pleura, this is the first point that becomes the lowest, the most dependent, that the fluid accumulates in this area, and then this angle may not be so clear because of accumulation of fluid. Then we will say the Castrophenic angle is obliterated, and this is because of pleural effusion of fluid accumulation over here. Okay. Okay. Then anteriorly, the parietal pleura of the costal pleura and parietal pleura of the mediastinal over here also, the parietal pleura in this area, there is a small area in which the anterior margin of the lung do not accommodate that area, and that area between the parietal costal pleura and the parietal mediastinal pleura, that is being called as the costo-mediastinal recessive pleura. Okay, medially, when the parietal pleura comes like that up to here, and from here, and from all around, when it reaches to this root, from this root area, it is being reflected in the form of a cuff. This parietal pleura from this area being reflected from this reflected in the form of a cuff, and this cuff of pleura, which you can see it over here, look, this cuff of pleura, which is bigger than the root of the lung, just like the cuff of the coat, which is more hanging down than the sleeve of the coat, which hangs more than the hand, and this cuff of parietal pleura around the lung root structure, that is being called as pulmonary ligament. So this cuff of pleura around this, it is being called as pulmonary ligament, and it is said that it, of course, do not perform any special function as a ligament. You can see it also over here, it is more clear. But it provides a dead space for this structure, that is the veins and arteries, which dilate during increased pressure condition. So this pulmonary ligament, a cuff of pleura like that, coming like this, and then it is reflect over the thoracic wall, and this is called as pulmonary ligament. So pulmonary ligament is not a ligament, but it is a cuff of pleura that lies around the lung root structures, but more extended inferiorly because it is much wider, like the coat, the sleeve of the coat around the hand. Okay, this is about the parietal pleura. The next other points we will discuss in the next lecture. Thank you.